The Durian Heat, bringing big ideas and critical opinions in Southeast Asia.
Hey, this is Arlene.
Hello, this is Gowri.
And of course, today we have a very special guest, and it's amazing to actually speak to a foreign minister, not from Malaysia, but from all the way to Timor Leste. And we are going to talk about ASEAN. Would Timor Leste be the 11th ASEAN member? What do you think, Gowri?
Well, we'll find out at the end of this interview. I think we have the right person here to tell us how's the process going on and whether or not it's going to happen as them being the 11th member of ASEAN.
So we have His Excellency Hernâni Coelho. Your name is very unique.
Quite difficult one.
And you are of course, your position is Minister of Foreign Affairs and Cooperation for Timor Leste. So tell us about, more about what you do day to day.
Well, its name stands for the Minister of Foreign Affairs and Cooperation. Sometimes some of our friends make joke of us that you're Minister of Foreign Affairs, so your business is actually outside the country.
Okay.
So
you don't deal with the domestic stuff.
Right, that's right. So sometimes whenever we go back home, they tend to say, welcome back home, because I believe in always outside.
Right.
But this is not the case. I think the Minister of Foreign Affairs is part of the institution of the state. And one of the main function of the Minister of Foreign Affairs is actually to foster understanding, cooperation with other countries in our region. This is have two aims. The first one is to safeguard the sovereignty of the country, and the second one is to promote cooperation for development. So I think all of the job that we are doing in a daily basis in the country is basically based on these two point of view or principles. Is to do the best to safeguard the country sovereignty and integrity, and the second one is to foster cooperation for development. And I think that will contribute as well as one of the prerequisites for the development is peace and stability. So we will work under this kind of framework.
So about Timor Leste, because a lot of the countries in Southeast Asia might not know much about Timor Leste, although Timor Leste was once part of Indonesia and had a bloody civil war, but since then it has gained full independence and a lot of things have changed. Perhaps you can share with us what's the update since then.
Certainly. Yes, I think you correctly mentioned it. Timor Leste is a quite tiny island, so we have
not as tiny as Malaysia.
No, it's much smaller than Malaysia, of course, because we have all the island of Timor is around 30,000 square kilometers, but it divided into two. The west part is part of Indonesia, and the eastern part is Timor Leste. So this is why Timor is the island. Leste means east. So this is why in Indonesian time, Indonesian call us Timor. Basically means the eastern part of Timor Island. It comes from the old century of colonization that we all underwent. Basically, Timor-Leste was colonized by the Portuguese, and the western part was by the Dutch. So the difference came from that one. Well, but I would like just to talk about how Timor-Leste is now and the situation of the country itself. In '74, we entered into a kind of what they call is a new era for the island. When there was the flower revolution in Portugal, the Portuguese decided to give the freedom to all the provinces to decide on their fate, what they want to be, whether to be independent, to join another country, or to maintain the status quo with the Portuguese itself. So we started a political process in the country. Unfortunately, in '75, there was a brief civil war that ended up with a major war for 24 years.
Yeah, that's crazy. Because growing up hearing about the war.
That's true. It was from '75, around September, October it started, and it actually went on until '99, until August, September '99. So it is a long years of conflict we have went through. And then right now in 2002, so between '99 and 2000, there was a transitional period under the United Nations. This is what we call the United Nations Transitional Administration for East Timor. And then from 2002, we entered into a new phase. It's what we call is the restoration of the independence of Timor. So at the time, we were quite desperate because as a new country, we have been in a war for more than 24 years. No proper education was carried out in the country. I mean, we didn't have the chance to prepare our people properly because all of us were busy with the fighting, the war. So by the time that we got the independence back, we were in a situation where we didn't have resources, whether human, money, infrastructure, everything was not there. So we were quite desperate at the time how to start rebuild the nation as a whole. I remember the first donor conference, it was held in Japan. We managed to mobilize some funds from international donors, including friends from Malaysia as well, with a contribution as well. And then the first government budget we have back in 2002 when we started the government, for the whole country, it was $78 million. You can imagine, how can you run the country with $78 million?
Yes.
It was impossible. It was a very difficult situation. But steadily, we improved. And I think that thanks God that God gave us some resources, especially on oil and gas. So we start to tap on these resources.
So you discover oil quite later after the war, is it?
No, the oil was already there for a long time, but it was not properly explored.
Managed, explored.
So, but during the Indonesian time, there was an agreement between Indonesia and Australia to jointly explore the area in the Timor Sea. So this is what we call the Joint Petroleum Development Area on the Timor Gap. So after independence, all of this part were passed back to Timor. So we renegotiated with Australia about the share arrangement with Australia. So we managed to secure 90% in terms of the revenue from this field on the GPD for Timor Leste. So based on that, we start to rebuild again our government budget. So by 2000...
But you're not relying entirely of your economy with oil.
Unfortunately, we are still relying...
Unfortunately.
85% of our budget now is basically came from the revenues from oil and gas.
Yeah, which is not good right now because the prices of oil is dropping.
This is why... like in this year and for coming years, we have to come up with some adjustment to our government budget because the oil price has been falling by more than 56% during the past year. So now it has been going up a little bit, but still, it was quite a big shock for us because, as I mentioned, we have to review our revenue by 56% in terms of from the oil and gas.
So what's the plan? I mean, since oil, you cannot rely on oil forever.
Yeah, definitely, yeah. No, I think that's true. So as I mentioned that between 2007, actually, we start to have this kind of revenue from the fields of the Timor Sea. So what we did back in 2004, 2005 is actually to establish what we call the Petroleum Fund, just to make sure that the oil and gas cannot become a curse for us. We have been learning from the experience of other countries about what we call the Dutch disease, the oil curse, and all of this. So we try to avoid that one. So we created a sovereign fund, we call it Petroleum Fund, where all of the money that came from the oil and gas will go to this fund. And then only through a due process, this money can be withdrawn to fund government programs and government activities. As you mentioned, that we cannot rely on oil and gas. Timor Leste, we have come up with what we call is our development vision for the future. So we identified 3 key sectors through which we think that we will be able to develop our country. The first one, of course, we need to be very realistic. The first one is the oil and gas industry, because this is the one that is readily available for us to tap on now. And the second one is actually on agriculture, and the third one in tourism. So this is basically what we can call is the triangle of our development for the future.
I like the tourism part. Probably you have another Bali, the Timor Leste version, because you have a lot of beautiful islands.
Certainly. I think when we talk about this tourism, as I mentioned, out of these 3 pillars, at this stage, as I can say, what we call initial stage, the biggest share of our economy came from the oil and gas. But in our vision for the future, maybe in 50 years' time or 100 years' time, the situation must be reversed. So the oil and gas should be the tiny component of our economy. The biggest one must be the tourism, as you mentioned rightly. Because Timor-Leste is a very interesting place to be, not only because of these natural heritages for the landscape and everything, but also we have a quite rich cultural heritage. So according to a study that was carried out by the World Trade Organization back in 2003-2004, they come up with like key attraction that Timor-Leste could actually package and sell as the main point for attracting the tourism, or as a key point for the tourism industry. So I think that one there is a good chance for us. Of course, we always say that we will not be able to compete with Bali, nor Thailand, or other countries, but we can be complementary to these very famous tourist sites, because we have been thinking in a way that we shall be as a complementing them instead of competing with them. So this has been the philosophy of our planning for the future.
And culturally, Timor-Leste is very distinct. Perhaps you can share more about the Portuguese-infused culture and with the native culture.
Certainly. Timorese culture is part of the Southeast Asia constellation of culture. There's not much difference because even though Timor Island, according to some anthropological records, the island has been inhabited thousands of years. We have some traces of this kind of original drawings on the caves that date back to 3,000 years ago. It means that the island, at least from 3,000 years ago, you have already civilized people living on the island because they came up with a kind of a proper settlement with their own culture, with drawings on the wall that tell the history of the presence on the island. So the Timorese culture, as I mentioned, it is a mix, a fusion between the Western and Southeast Asia culture. But during the process itself, because of the Portuguese, they have the presence in many other continents, in Africa, in Americas, and Europe. So they brought along with them all of these components into Timor-Leste. So now, if you line up 10 Timorese, you will see all of them are different, with all different features. Some Chinese features, some Indian features, some Arabic features.
Are you sure it's not Malaysia?
That's true. It's a little bit like Malaysia. It's very diverse. So we are quite diverse. So, but one thing that is in common that we have is that we still have a kind of a central culture heritage. That is what we call it Timorese culture. This Timorese culture is based on the principle of monotheism, like other beliefs traditional beliefs in Southeast Asia. Of course, the Christianity was introduced by the Portuguese. It did have a big impact on the way of life of Timorese, but still we maintain the roots of our culture. That is what we call the luliks. Luliks basically sacred houses that we have in the island. So every one of us, we have our own sacred houses. Every one of us, we belong to a specific ethnic group arrangement. So we can go to the church on the Sunday, but on the other day we still go back to the big stones and
so you really, I would say, emphasize a lot on the separation between church and state, or mosque and state.
Definitely. I think in Portuguese time, it has basically become it's quite difficult to differentiate between where the authority of church go and where the government authorities goes. But since 74, since when the political party started Timor, we became very clear that Timor-Leste is a secular state.
I think Malaysia can learn a thing or two from Timor-Leste.
We say that the religion should be on the other side. Even though Timor-Leste, 95% is Catholic, but even that we reject to put Catholic as the religion of the state. We say no.
So you don't want to be a second Philippines as well.
So we still say that all religions have the right to live in Timor. They can build the masjids, they can build the musolas, you can build your quills, you can build pagodas. It's okay.
What about the interfaith relations between communities?
In Timor, it is a very peaceful one. So in Timor-Leste, it's very difficult for you to find. When you meet someone, they will never ask you what kind of religion you have. The only thing they ask you from which ethnic group you came from. But they will not ask you what is your religion. So we didn't ask. So for us, we will ask you where you came from because we want to see what kind of language we are going to speak to you. Because in Timor-Leste, even small, we have 36.
Really?
Different ethnic groups. And 36 language, I can say, or more or less, but I think potentially dialects, maybe around 15 language. So the reason why we ask is where you are from is basically we want to make sure whether I will be able to speak in your own language. So this has been a kind of a practice in Timor. This is why in Timor we are not fluent in any language, but we can speak many languages because we speak a little bit of everything. But this has been a kind of trend in Timor-Leste that we are eager to learn other language. So if we speak one or two words, we are happy already with that. So we'll try to speak. Even when we speak wrongly, it's no matter, but we will speak it out. So this is why we never ask what is your religion, because we're not going to go to pray with you, of course. This is why we prefer to ask from where you're from, and then by the time we try to speak any language if we can speak.
Okay, so an average person in Timor-Leste can speak over 30 languages.
What I can say that at least the Timorese will speak more than 2 languages in average. So one is our own dialect from where we came from, and the second one is the lingua franca of Timor. That is the Teton language. But in terms of the government, officially we have 4 working language.
Right.
So it is a Bahasa, English, Portuguese, and Timorese. And then we have 2 official language, Timorese and Portuguese as the official language. But Bahasa is widely spoken, English is being used in mostly all of their government departments. So in Timor, whenever you show up somewhere, there will be always someone that can speak to you in English. So it is not a big.
So we can travel there safely without worrying. Like, do I need to speak the ethnic language?
So sometimes we were joking with our friends that okay, if in Timor, at least most of us will be able to speak Bahasa Malay.
Okay.
Bahasa Malay, I mean Indonesian and Malay, we just mix them together.
Right.
And the second one is that many of us will understand Portuguese. So we put together, it means that we are speaking the language of around 500 million. So we can communicate to 500 million people, basically. This is what we try to proud ourselves, because the Portuguese community is around 265 million. Add on the Malay and Indonesian speaking community, another maybe 260 or 270. So it altogether is like more than 500 million. So we are proud that we can speak to 500 million.
That's amazing. Anyway, we'll take one short break. When we return, we'll talk more about ASEAN as well as Timor Leste.
The Durian Heat, bringing big ideas and critical opinions in Southeast Asia.
Hey, this is Arlene.
Hello, this is Gowri.
And of course, you are still with us and with the representative from Timor Leste, Minister of Foreign Affairs and Cooperation, His Excellency Hernâni Coelho. I always pronounce it wrongly.
We'll get there.
We'll get there. So, yeah, Gowri, you love football a lot, right?
I do, and because he kept mentioning a lot of Portuguese influence and infusion earlier, I'm a bit curious as when it comes to the World Cup. Do you guys support Portugal? Are you a big fan of Portugal?
Oh yeah, that's right. In Timor, Timorese people in general, I mean individually, many Timorese people, they feel some kind of bond with the Portuguese people.
Or allegiance.
The culture,
Right.
languages, and also the cross marriages that we have between Timorese and Portuguese. So whenever the Portuguese participate in any international event, especially the World Cup, usually the city of Lille will be basically closed. Everyone will be assembled.
Okay.
Office of the government, and the government even put like big screens in front
Wow.
of
Okay.
people to watch the football match. So usually Timorese they are quite
Right.
enthusiastic whenever Portuguese playing. They always go there and share for Portuguese.
I can imagine like a big Cristiano Ronaldo statue being built.
Cristiano Ronaldo is visit Timor and he visited Timor.
Oh, he did? Yeah. Okay.
So this is most of the Portuguese they visit Timor. So Cristiano Ronaldo is no exception. He was in Timor and
Okay.
he was part of the community. So he met the people, encouraged the young people to play football, play with them. So it is a very what do you call it? Like a kind of a big family.
Okay.
Oh, that's very interesting. And Timor Leste also have reached out a lot to other countries. I mean, you mentioned earlier off air that you basically everyone in Timor Leste basically have a Portuguese passport, right?
Yeah, that's true. I think basically by law, the Timor Leste was still part of the Portuguese territory until 2002. It means that whoever that was born prior 2002 automatically have a Portuguese citizenship.
There you go. So where's our British citizenship?
Yeah. So in Timor Leste, because we opted for what we call the dual nationality, so you can have more than one nationality. So many of us, whether we hold Portuguese passport or we hold Australian passport, because we have 26,000 Timorese living in Australia as Australian citizens.
And they can still keep their citizenship. Yeah. Oh, that's very interesting.
Yeah, that's right. So we have this kind of a quite interesting arrangement and a quite interesting principle.
So it seems like distinctively, Timor-Leste seems to be more liberal than the rest of Southeast Asia.
I will not be able to come up with a proper assessment what is the degree of the liberalism we have. But what I can say is that we are quite open and we are quite easygoing when it comes to dealing with people from other countries.
And you have no problem with freedom of expression as well.
That's true. As I mentioned off the air, that these people, whenever they now one word, they try to speak 10. So sometimes they speak very funny things, but we are not shy to speak up. So this is why maybe one of the reasons why we are quite easy to learn other language, because we are not shy to express ourselves. So whenever now a little bit, we try to speak to you in your language. So this is why in Timor-Leste, you will find people, especially I think for friends from Southeast Asia, will not be a big problem when they visit Timor-Leste, because most of the people in Timor-Leste will understand or speak Bahasa Indonesia, that is Bahasa Malay. And especially when it comes to number, like 1, 2, 3,
Yeah.
Portuguese is more difficult to say.
Right.
So when you go to the market, you will say the lady speaking in Timor, maybe say the name of the
Vegetable.
things
Yeah.
in Portuguese, but the price in
Okay.
You just get quite confused if you are not really someone
Right.
from the Southeast Asian.
So it's pretty much like Malaysia as well, where we actually combine a few languages together and see just what works and what's easier to understand.
But what's interesting when you mention about freedom of expression, right? If I'm not mistaken, correct me if I'm wrong, Timor Leste has signed almost all of the United Nations Declaration and Convention.
That's correct. Because our law in Timor Leste, what we say is that the primacy of international law. So in our constitution, it clearly states that the national law cannot be contrary to international laws. So if there is any difference,
So that's part of the constitution.
part of the constitution. So if there is any difference, the international law will prevail. So I think this is what we call this primacy of international law in our legal system.
Right. So maybe we want to move on to ASEAN now and ask the million-dollar question.
This is the million-dollar question.
So is Timor Leste ready to be a part of ASEAN?
Yes, I think in terms of ASEAN, this has been a long-standing vision of Timor Leste. I mentioned it in '74. We have this kind of political party creation, the new era for Timor Leste. On the first day of the '74, one of our foreign affairs representative, he went to Indonesia and he expressed openly that Timor Leste wishes to become member of ASEAN.
Okay.
Even in '74, which is a long time ago.
And this is before the independence.
Before the independence. Because when we started the political process to decide on the fate of Timor, and this person that actually later on became our president, Ramazorda, he went to Indonesia. At that time, he was the spokesperson for the African Party, and then he expressed his vision that Timor Leste geographically is part of the region. Culturally, we have a lot of similarities. There are core values that we all share. So Timor Leste should join the ASEAN as a part of the region. And then after the restoration of the independence in 2002, we started the process. So in 2005, we take the first step for the ARF, the Asian Regional Forum, and then later on 2006, 2007, if I'm not mistaken, we signed the Treaty of Amity. And then in 2011,
That's where you have the observer status, is it?
we are at the ARF. We are a member of the Asian Regional Forum. And then the Treaty of Amity is signed by countries that actually have this kind of intention to have a closer cooperation with ASEAN, because there are principles through which the way how we are going to engage. And then on 2011, we submitted the official application to be a member of the ASEAN. So the process has been going in phases, like prior to the civil war, and then after the restoration of independence. So that is a kind of, it's not something that just came out from the blue, but it's something that has been pondered thoroughly from decades, more than 4 decades. And in terms of the preparation that we have, I think based on the vision that the Asian community will be coming to effect in 2015, so we are building our mechanism based on these 3 pillars of the Asian community pillars. So based on the security and political security, or the economic and socio-cultural aspects. So this is the situation that we develop in the country in order to allow us to have those necessary means to be able to participate in the club, but also not only to participate, but to be able to contribute positively to the objectives of the organization.
But I'm kind of curious. It's taking too long for the process. While you see other countries and they have questionable democratic processes in their own country, it didn't take them that long. I'm just wondering, were there any other stumbling blocks that you face, or countries that do not want you to be part of ASEAN? If you can answer that.
It's quite a difficult question, but what I can say is that I think all the Asian member countries, they agree that Timor Leste is part of the region. So by its own right, geographically, it should be part of the ASEAN group. The only question that actually emerges is that whether Timor Leste is ready to come this time, or have to wait a little bit more for a few more years in order to be able to join the organization without actually creating the burden for ourselves and also the burden for the organization. Well, I think we accept this kind of reasoning. That's why we are promoting the internally the process. We are socializing. We finalized the socialization process in the country for the citizens in general, for the institutions and for the civil society about what is ASEAN, why we need to be there, and also in terms of structurally, we are preparing ourselves in a very systematic way, especially looking at these three aspects, by looking at the infrastructure, by looking at the human capital, by looking at the regulatory framework, and by looking at the potential cooperation that could be immediately implemented, or those that could be implemented after a certain period of time.
But how can ASEAN benefit Timor-Leste? Since Timor-Leste, even as a country, you have done so far, since independence.
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, because when we started our government, or self-government back in 2002, we started with $78 million. But right now, our government budget...
And you're debt-free.
We're debt-free. So right
That's
now,
a critical area that I need to emphasize.
That's correct. So now we have the government budget has went up from $78 million in 2002 to $1.5 billion. So it is you can imagine the reduplication of the logarithm increase in terms of the budget for the government. So this will reflect in terms of the services that the state is supposed to provide to its citizens and the facility the state need to build for the country in order to sustain it as a viable country. So we think that when you ask about what kind of benefit Timor-Leste will bring into the ASEAN, I think first of all because we are a new country. And second one, because we have the vision for the country based on these three pillars of development. And these three pillars of development, Timor-Leste alone will not be able to do that. So we need to join efforts and forces with other countries, especially in our region. We think that by entering into a due arrangement and a proper arrangement with our friends, the benefits will be a multiplicative benefit instead of us doing it alone. So this is why we are now open up ourselves for major projects in the country, especially on the what we call the South Coast Development Programs, for refinery, for oil and gas refinery, for supply bases, and also for agricultural development and tourism development. So I think all of this together will potentially contribute to the economic development, but not only that, from the political point of view, Timor-Leste have linkages with Africa, with Europe, and with the Americans, special linkages through the member countries of the Portuguese-speaking countries. Timor-Leste now is the rotating chair of the Portuguese-speaking countries club, 9 countries inside, with an around 260 million people, with an GDP, combined economy, equivalent to the ASEAN, $2.5 trillion. So it means that there will be a multiplicative effect, and Timor-Leste can play not only as a bridging role, but also facilitating role whenever we come to our cooperation beyond the ASEAN region.
So, like transnational issues in Southeast Asia, which is still ongoing. I think the most notable one during this time would be the South China Sea. Is it also part of the concern of Timor-Leste, even though it's not in the area of Timor-Leste?
No, definitely. I think the South China Sea issues is also a case relevant to the Timor-Leste challenge itself. We are still in the process of defining our maritime boundary with Australia. So we share the seas with Australia, we share the seas with Indonesia. So now we are in the process of actually talking about the maritime boundary with Australia as well. We will be initiating also the negotiation process with Indonesia for the maritime boundary. So the issue of the China Sea, as we see it can be a precedence for what will happen in our region. So for us, this is a common interest of the countries that actually came from this kind of legacy of occupation before. So our natural borders were basically transformed, and there is what we call is the residual issues that came from the colonization process that happened in our country, and also the struggle for independence. So these are things that need to be resolved, and we cannot resolve it in one by one. We can resolve it in a situation where international principles should be adopted, should be used in order to ensure that actually the solution that we find is a fair solution, a sustainable solution for the problems.
I mean, a lot of criticism towards ASEAN, especially ASEAN not being seen as a very strong regional bloc in comparison to European Union, especially on issues relating to human rights. I think this I would refer to the issue of a refugee crisis. But if Timor-Leste were to be in, how would you do things differently, or how would you add more voice, like critical voices in Southeast Asia?
So I think we have to also understand the way how ASEAN was set up. Back in '67, the political dynamics in the region was totally different. If we look at the Southeast Asia back in '67, the Southeast Asia in '72, '74, and Southeast Asian in 2014 is totally a different history. So I think the philosophy that emerged back on those times, where the founder fathers decided to set up this organization, the conditionalities were quite different from what we have now. ASEAN has progressed from the initial approach that the ASEAN has into a much more wide approach that the ASEAN has now. Of course, still it is in a very early stage, so we cannot expect everything to be covered, everything to be perfect. But I think ASEAN has evolved according to the development of the political dynamics in the region and the world as a whole. For example, if initially it was mainly concentrated on economical, socio-cultural issues, but now we have the political and security issues encompassed into the pillars of the ASEAN itself. As I mentioned, because this is 10 countries, came with many very different background in the way how they were built as a state and the nations. So when it comes to the question you put up, we believe that from Timor Leste point of view, our own experience will contribute to diversify the way of thinking and the approaches that we are going to use when we are facing or we are being put in front of those kind of challenges we are facing about the human rights, about the illegal fishing, about the transnational crimes, about the unregulated fishing in our seas. All of this, I think, are things that potentially, all together with different background, with different experience, different challenges, will potentially come up new and creative ideas on the way how you look at it.
So you will try your best.
We try best. And we think because in Timor Leste, as I mentioned, because we adopted a very, what we call is an universalistic value when it comes to the issues of democracy, human rights and justice. So we think that this kind of experience potentially are experience that could be useful to be shared with our friends in the region, as immediate region.
Okay. Anyway, we'll take another one short break. When we return, we'll discuss more on Timor Leste's relationship with Indonesia, as well as what ASEAN thinks about Timor Leste.
Certainly.
The Durian Heat, bringing big ideas and critical opinions in Southeast Asia.
Hey, this is Arlene.
Hi, this is Gowri.
And of course, you're still with us on the Durian Heat, where we discuss today about Timor Leste as 11th ASEAN member. And of course, with me as usual, Hernâni Coelho. Oh my God, I can't. But yeah, just to go back to our discussion about ASEAN. First of all, the awareness of ASEAN among the community is not that high. In fact, it's really low.
In Malaysia.
Right.
So what about Timor Leste? How are the people? Do they know what ASEAN is? Are they involved? Do they think on a regional level?
Yeah, I think we came through a kind of a process, as I mentioned earlier, but it was interrupted for 24 years. But back in the 2002, when after we restored independence, so what we did is that the idea started to be what we call is to be consolidated inside the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, because the pioneer of the vision was the Minister of Foreign Affairs at the time, Mr. José Ramos Horta. And then this idea was further on, basically communicated and embraced by the office of the president. It went to the parliament, and then on the past 1.5 or 2 years, we brought this idea down to the community. So instead of the community come to the city to look for what is ASEAN, actually we brought the ASEAN ideals, the ASEAN as an organization, to our community.
How do you do it?
Basically, we went through a kind of a group discussions, seminars, workshops, and talk shows with the community in the country as a whole for 1.5 years.
But how you make it interesting and less dry? Because our Malaysian government does it as well. I'm not saying that they didn't do anything, but it's just not interesting enough, I would say.
In our case, because our people like to look at new things, they are always eager to know what is around, who is around or what is around. So we went down with the Asian flag and all the Asian member flags. And then we said, you see how colorful is these beautiful things? So now let's talk about what this is about. So and then we start to speak about them, that this is our island, but around us are this country, these people is like this, and this is the organization they have, and this is the way how the future of our region will be. So we want you to be aware, because by the time you step into the airport and you go out, you will meet this country, these people, and this kind of political system. So you have to understand that this is the way you are going to engage in the future. This is where you live, but this is your neighbor with whom you have to live.
So in terms of percentage, where is the awareness level of ASEAN?
I think we haven't come up with a kind of a statistical kind of assessment, so I cannot say exactly what is the percentage. But what I can say is that the ASEAN is quite it is well known for the community.
So if I go to the village and I say that, hey, I'm from Malaysia and part of ASEAN, do you think they would know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I think it's likely, especially for those that are educated, because I think for the people that are illiterate, of course, they will just confuse. Yeah, we know that Indonesia, we know it's Malaysia. They will know about Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, but when the ASEAN as an organization, it's difficult for them to explain. When you speak that ASEAN, they will say yes, but if you ask them to explain, they may get confused how to explain it. But I think there's a level of acceptance, a level of awareness that this organization exists. This organization is made up of our friends, of our neighbors. But I think for those that are educated, potentially they will be able to explain a little bit or speak a little bit about ASEAN.
But what about Timor-Leste's perception about Malaysia?
I think Malaysia, we have a look at Malaysia as also a very good example in terms of your development, especially for your economic development. Back in, we remember very well, back in the 96 and 70 during the financial crisis, the policy that you undertook in regard to the situation of your country. So this kind of experience were well reflected in our political sphere, and especially for those that are involved in the political activities. We are very aware about Malaysia itself. But Malaysia also played a very important role back in 1999 during the international force for Timor Leste. Malaysia deployed a contingent of Malaysian forces to participate on those one. So the Timor's people perception about Malaysia is very positive, because in 2006 and 7, when we have this major crisis, the second crisis we have in Timor between the police force and defense force, they were basically confronting each other, and Malaysia was among the 4 countries that actually deployed the rapid response unit to the country. So it was Portugal, Malaysia, Australia, and New Zealand. So it shows once again the level of trust that we have with Malaysians, because otherwise we will not accept. Because
so Malaysia, when it comes to international relation or diplomacy, we are actually quite on the forefront.
Malaysia is very active, because in Timor Leste, especially, I think if I can speak from the Timor Leste experience itself, Malaysia has been there since the first day of the what we call is a popular consultation during the crisis period that we went through, and also until now during the development process. We have very close relation with Malaysia on many aspects, on human capital development, on investment and trade, and also on the oil and gas exploration, because Petronas ever participated in some of those activities in the Timor Sea. And now we have agreement between Timor Leste, between our National Petroleum Company, with Malaysian MHS, the helicopter company, for the operation in our sea, in the platforms for the oil and gas in the Timor Sea. So there are a lot of linkages, a lot of knowledge, and a lot of positive view of Timorese people when it comes to Malaysia.
So Malaysia aside, I know Malaysia has done a lot of great things together with Timor-Leste when it comes to diplomatic relations. But what about Indonesia? Since independence, have you guys met to each other, say hi?
Definitely, I think the experience between Timor-Leste and Indonesia, I think, become a very remarkable one. I think many countries in the world, they still question how can you normalize your relation with Indonesia in a very short period of time. Because just right after 99, in few months' time, actually we managed to normalize the relation with Indonesia. Now our relation with Indonesia is the best relation possible that any country can expect or can have.
What about with Jokowi?
Jokowi, the new president? Yes, I think the new president, he just came to the office recently, but also I think the same thing. Nothing changed in terms of the policy towards Timor-Leste. From the former presidents, that most of them, they have some experience with Timor-Leste, because they are former generals, they have been deployed to Timor in one or another time. But even for President Jokowi, there is not much difference between when it comes to the policy. I was just to mention is that after the restoration of independence, the first thing we did is that we set up what we call the Commission for Trust and Friendship. So basically, to look at the experience in Timor in a point that is not in impartial way, not in one-sided. So we look at them as a common problem that we face, and find out the reasons why that happened, and what we can do together to avoid that it will repeat in the future. So this kind of reconciliation process went very well. And right now we have, like in the border between Timor and Indonesia, the land border, we have what we call is the safe corridor passes for the people living in both sides. So basically people that are living on the border area, they can cross from one side to the other side without passport.
Oh.
Yeah, just with a pass you can corner to one side, stay for one day,
and it's back.
It's
perfectly fine.
Perfectly fine, no problem. You can go to like maybe around 5 kilometers from the border, where you can do some trade with your friends, your families, have some drink, and then you come back. It's okay, no problem at all. And in this the city of Dili, half of the small business are owned by the Indonesians. And many of the government projects, major infrastructure projects in Timor are actually being implemented by Indonesian big companies.
Oh, that's interesting.
And we have more than 3,000 students studying in Indonesia, paying only local fee. They didn't pay international fee. And also we have a lot of Timorese living on the other side. So it is a kind of...
It's similar to Malaysia and Singapore. Like, I mean, you have your differences in the past, but now it's like brother and sister kind of relationship.
We can say that. And especially because Timor Leste people, because most of us, we studied in Indonesia. So we bring back this kind of connection, this kind of togetherness that we have with our Indonesian friends. Like yesterday during the Southwest Pacific Dialogue, I also mentioned to my friends in the group that actually we have one peculiarity when it comes to connectivity between Timor and Indonesia. Sometimes our line ministers, because they know each other, like the ministers of infrastructure in Timor may know the minister of infrastructure in Indonesia. So sometimes they will communicate on a different level. Even they didn't need the minister of foreign affairs to facilitate that, because they now sort of just pick up a phone, call each other. So the relations are very good, and I think this is a kind of experience that we always try to share with other friends in countries that wherever we have our activity with. I just mentioned I would like to also emphasize that we are sharing actively our experience with the fragile states in the world, what we call the G7 place. This is G7, but not the big G7. The small G7 means the fragile states. Now are 20 countries, mostly from Africa, Asia a little bit, and the Caribbean. But we are working together with them to share the experience Timor Leste have when it comes to peace and reconciliation, and also to bring up the voices in international arena.
That's very good. Before we end the show, probably a lot of people might not realize, but this weekend, which is on the 8th of August, is actually ASEAN Day.
That's right. That's true. It's 48 years.
What do you think of ASEAN Day? I mean, perhaps it's a national holiday in Timor-Leste. Not just yet, perhaps.
Not yet. Not yet. We haven't have yet the national holiday. I think. But what I can say is that I think the anniversary of the founding of the ASEAN, I think it shall be a day of reflection for all of us, to look at the vision that our founding fathers have back then in the 67, the evolution of the ASEAN and the future of the ASEAN. And I think this is when we reflect upon that, looking at the way how it progressed, I think Asian people must be proud. I think yesterday I was listening to the hymn anthem of ASEAN. It's very interesting because they say that this is a dream that we dare to share. And then we are bounded as one to look at the world. It is a very interesting concept. So I think this is basically reflect the spirit of this organization, looking at the people through the historical, through the cultural heritages, through the social interactions, but look also to the region and beyond as one. I think this is very important. I think reacting as one towards the outside the region is very important to increase, I mean, the power, the visibility, and basically the benefit that we can acquire when we act as a group. This is why Timor Leste, we say that we have to act as a group, because we believe on this kind of what we call the multiplicative effect when we acting as a group.
Well said. Anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you, and good morning for all friends in Malaysia. Selamat pagi, salam sejahtera.
Thank you.